on a visit to Edinburgh on Friday. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn gave his backing to a campaign against a £50 million development, which critics claim will rip the heart out of one of the most famous thoroughfares in the capital city. Developers want to demolish a 1930s Art Deco building on Leith Walk to make way for new student flats, but the move is being opposed by the Save Leith Walk campaign. There's a similar story happening in places across Scotland where there's been an upsurge in the creation of new flats to accommodate foreign students. So what's behind the developments, and how can we strike a balance with safeguarding our local heritage at the same time? Joining me this morning to talk about this is the lead campaigner for Save Leith Walk, Leslie Porteous. Good morning, Leslie.
Good morning.
And with me in the studio this morning, Town Planner Craig McLaren, Director of the Royal Town Planning Institute Scotland. Craig, good morning.
Hi, Stephen.
Thanks for your time. Leslie, first, what's the problem?
The problem is we've got this iconic building down the bottom of Leith Walk. It has thriving businesses in it, independent businesses. This building has stood there for 80 years. They want to knock it down. It's part of Edinburgh's, Leith's heritage. They want to put in student flats, 500 of them, over the back where there's a bit of wasteland. There's warehouses there at the moment. And they want to put in social housing and a hotel, but also put in back in the units or back into the buildings when they rebuild them. But these businesses that are there can't survive for over 2 years without trading somewhere.
So the developers have suggested the businesses could move back in 2 years once the development has taken place. But you're saying that's simply not practical. A business can't survive for 2 years without any premises to work from.
Yes, they can't. Nobody could go away for 2 years and then come back again. Some businesses at the moment are being asked to leave just now. There's no need for these businesses to leave just now. They could still trade until the last lease runs out next year. But they've been asked to go and they've been invited back, which could take up to 3 years for them to come back. Some of them haven't even had their start-up costs back. There's no way a business could go away for that length of time and come back.
Leslie, is the concern about the development itself and about the impact on local traders and businesses, or is it about this influx of student accommodation? Is it 500 you said would be moving into the area? Is that the big concern for you?
That's what we've been told, 500. Save Leith Walk is not against students. We're not against development. We're just wanting it to change so that it's in the best interests of the community. These businesses there are community-based. Some of them have been there for 40 years plus. We welcome students, but do we need 500? At the top of Leith Walk, we have 5 blocks of student accommodation within 5 minutes walk of each other.
And you think it's just going to completely change the character of the area?
Yes. Over the last few years, the heart of Leith is starting to change. It's becoming more gentrified. Up the top, we've now got faceless buildings, and they're going to try and put these same faceless buildings down the bottom. This building is part of our old railway.
So you want to hang on to it. Now, Jeremy Corbyn was there on Friday, wasn't he?
He was.
And he's given his back into the campaign. What did he tell you?
He said us just to keep fighting. But I also want to say that we've had the backing of all parties. Our local MSPs, our local councillors have all backed us.
All right, Leslie, stay there. Here's Craig McLaren, Director of the Royal Town Planning Institute Scotland. Craig, we heard what Leslie had to say there. One street, a long street, Leith Walk, but at the top, student flats, more student flats coming in. We're seeing a lot of this, and not just in Edinburgh. What's going on?
Well, I don't want to talk specifically about that development, but as you say, there's things like this happening across Scotland just now. For me, there's a number of different issues. One is how developers engage with their communities, and I would be arguing that they should be doing that as early as they possibly can in a very transparent way.
To avoid situations like this.
And I think we've got a situation just now, the way the planning system works, that most people engage with it through saying what they don't want, through objecting to a planning application. And that's fair enough, but I think I would rather have a situation where we had people who engaged and talked about what they did want, and they were given a platform for that to happen. So a much more proactive, a much more constructive discussion early on, I think would could put us in a better footing for having those discussions. And then having a conversation about how you can deliver what's agreed or what compromise can be brought forward. There's some other issues as well, just the influx of student housing, as you've touched upon. We've seen that across the cities and towns towns across Scotland just now. I think there's a balance to be struck there. It's always a balance, but that balance has to be struck because students will bring in, they'll bring in footfall for local businesses, they'll bring in that economic boost, which might not have happened before. But at the same time, you don't want large ghettos of students who perhaps bring in a different dynamic and a different lifestyle to what's there already. So you need to try and make sure that those things are all thought through in the longer term. And there's another thing for me as well around how we treat our historic buildings. And just now we try and do that again very proactively. We have designations, you have listed buildings, you have ancient monuments, you have conservation areas, trying to make sure we save the best of the best. But there's an issue with historic buildings insofar as there's not a lot of grant money around to try and save them. And you'll have some enlightened developers who will try their best to try and save the best elements of them. But the truth is, for most developers, it's easier to have a flat, open site to work on because it's less complicated, it's easier and it's probably cheaper as well.
Back to you, Leslie, from the Save Leith Walk campaign. Can you see any virtue to this at all in terms of, Leith Walk's had a lot of challenges with the trams when the road was dug up and everything else as well. Couldn't the influx of this kind of number of students be good for local businesses and good for the local community?
No doubt they could, but it's also pushing out families who want to live in Leith. I know of families at the moment that are being asked to leave their house because the landlord, the owner of the property, wants to sell because they're scared that they're going to lose out on it. So there's people being displaced in Leith at the moment because of this potential development.
Craig, what's behind this big push with new housing for students? I mean, back in the day when I was a student, I lived in a succession of grotty tenement flats across Edinburgh. Why this push for new student accommodation in cities? And it's not just Edinburgh, it's Aberdeen, it's Dundee, it's Glasgow as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of things. One is there's probably been a recognition by local authorities that there is this economic boost to be had from students. And some of the sites in which some of the student accommodation has been located would have been sites which wouldn't have been used for anything else before. There are issues around housing on this because I think the other thing we're finding is that investors probably see student accommodation as something which they'll get a bigger return on than housing. A lot of investors are still very worried about the housing market and won't invest in it. So what we need to try and do is make sure we don't just take the short-term fix all the time, but we actually think about what the long-term best interest would be. And that's what planning authorities do. They're there to try and work on the public interest and make sure we look not just to the immediate geography, but to the wider geography, and also not just to the immediate timescale, but also to the longer term.
But what about the cultural and social aspects of this that Leslie was talking about there? It's such a vibrant area, Leith Walk, and that's what is endangered when the focus just becomes about development and making money for developers.
Absolutely. And we need to try and retain what we can. And that's why we have things like conservation areas and regeneration schemes to try and make sure that we keep what's there. We try and build on the cultural vibrancy which they bring, and we need to try and support that as best we can.
We've got a statement here from the Drum Property Group who are behind this. They say they've undertaken an extensive consultation programme including 5 days of exhibitions. Feedback from the local community has helped shape our proposals in terms of design, the inclusion of a music venue, the size and style of the retail outlets. Our proposals incorporate sympathetic design with a mix of residential, hotel, restaurant, etc., which will continue the rich tradition of diversity, independence and interest which makes Leith Walk such an exciting destination. Leslie Porteous, I suspect you might have something to say about that.
Yes. First and foremost, the building's in a conservation area. It doesn't seem to be that protected if this building is in a conservation area. They just want to knock it down. Drum, we've had extensive talks with Drum. They are going to demolish the building. That's what they want to do. At the moment, there is a live music venue in there that is very, very successful. They do a lot of community work, and so do many of the other shops and retail businesses in that block do community work. You can't replicate a community once you've removed it, I'm afraid.
Where do you go from here in terms of your campaign?
We're going to have to wait now and to see when they put the planning permission in. We've got over 9,000 signatures from just Leith alone that says no to this demolition.
So you'll be taking Jeremy Corbyn's advice and fighting to the bitter end on this?
Yes, we will.
Leslie Porteous, a lead campaigner from Save Leith Walk, and Craig McLaren with me in the studio from the Royal Town Planning Institute Scotland. Thank you both very much indeed for your time. 11:55, Monday morning, it's BBC Radio Scotland.